that's a difficult question, right? So the idea that, maybe the ability to know a lot about the citizens and influence them, effectively, allows a central planner to improve a whole suite of things, like better transportation, better healthcare, and so on, right? But then if we start noticing that, these powers can be misused or, by some parties or whatever, like there's regulatory capture by corporations or whatnot, then we could revise this. If you imagine some kind of dashboard where you could say, okay, now you need to know less about this and more about that, to kind of optimize the functioning of this centralized power, right? But that assumes that you can know, like, what dial impacts what outcomes. And I think political scientists have a really hard time today understanding these things and establishing causal relationships between institutional features, of the government or the constitution of the country and so on one hand, and outcomes on the ground, because there's so much else going on. So I think it's a really, really hard question, which is, as a scientist, if I had full power to run any scientific experiment I want, and I'm sure political scientists would dream about this, is to be able to change those dials randomly, right? To kind of experiment. But we don't live in that world, right? We don't. That itself is a corruptible sort of power as well. So maybe as our understanding of these systems improves, we can, could we perhaps automate some of this process itself? Maybe can we automate the process of oversight over government itself, so that we can start forming, like, automatically establishing theories about what interests might be driving what decisions, and so that we can kind of have better corruption detection in the system. I think that's a very interesting proposition, because just like we have algorithms today to try and detect fraud in financial transactions, there are patterns that we know are indicative of fraudulent behavior, right? So you could imagine doing something like this. You could take these algorithms and point them at the government. So as you give politicians more power to, or these algorithmic politicians, let's say, more power, if you could also empower the citizens with tools for monitoring and detecting fraud and detecting corruption and so on, then maybe you have a system that could work. But we're very far from that, and I think it'll be fascinating if we end up building something like this one day, into the future, and like a fully algorithmic government with separations of powers, kind of adversarial players that somehow ultimately both answer to us. That's a new form. That would be a new form of government. That would be kind of maybe a phase transition, in human civilization.